Just to let you know, we do have this webinar also being translated into French. So if you would like to listen to this in French, you can go to the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and listen to the interpretation there. So for those of you that are not familiar with Concern, we are an Irish NGO dedicated to reducing extreme poverty and suffering in some of the world's poorest countries. We currently work in 23 countries across Africa, Asia, Middle East, and Caribbean. Um, so today we're going to be talking to you throughout this session about, first of all, why we're doing gender transformative programming in Malawi and why we felt that it was necessary in this context. Then we'll talk about the approach that we designed in order to respond to this need that we had identified. So we'll look at how we prepared for this kind of approach, and we'll be talking with one of our technical partners for that, Sonke Gender Justice. Then we'll look at the program design and what we're actually doing and what it entails. And then we'll look at the research component that we have, this ongoing research to actually measure how effective our gender transformative programming component is. And we'll have our research partner from Trinity College Dublin talking to us about that. And then we'll look at what seems to be working so far, so some of the initial findings, and we have a couple of videos to show you to actually hear from program participants themselves what impact this is having on them. And then we'll look at the gaps that we've identified and where we want to go from here. So all of that should take us around 45 minutes of presentation, and that will leave us plenty of time for your questions and our answers at the end. So if you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat throughout the presentations, and then we'll come to them all at the end. So to introduce our speakers to you, we have Thokozani Kalanje, who's the Graduation Program Manager with Concern in Malawi. We have Mpo Mabena, who's a Regional Coordinator with Sonke Gender Justice, our technical partner. And we have Dr. Tara Bedi, who's a PhD Fellow at the Department of Economics from Trinity College Dublin, so our research partner. So we'll be hearing from all of them. So I will now hand you over to Toko, who's going to start off with context of Malawi.
Thank you very much, Adele. So like Adele said, my name is Thokozani Kalanje. I'll talk about the program in Malawi, that is the Gender Transformative Program, and also our program in general, and then we'll also show a video which will talk about the program participants. So to start off the conversation today, Concern Malawi conducted a formative research in 2017. This research was done with WOLEC. It's a local organization, which means Women's Legal Resources Center. So some of the findings from the research that we did, which was done in 3 districts in Mangochi, Nsanje, and Palombe, include the following. The first one was that men suffer intense condemnation. This is from other community members, especially if they fail to play their role as the provider of the household. Men are also said to be bewitched if they assist their wives or women in the household with other household chores, because in Malawi it is mostly believed to be the woman's role to do these household chores. So if the man does them, then he is teased or he's made fun of by the other community members that he has been bewitched by his wife. Men also believed that they should provide income and also control decision making in the household. And also this is done in order to make sure that they maintain the upper hand in the household, that is by playing the role as the provider. Men also use polygamy as a threat if they see that their wife is not doing what they want. So maybe they'll threaten her and say that I'll get another wife, which is culturally acceptable if you don't do what I want. And also sex is perceived as transactional, where if a woman earns more money, the man sees it as emasculating. So the woman has to try to earn less money than her husband. And also for independent women, it is assumed that she is using sex in order to get money. Another thing that we found through this formative research was that the burden of providing falls solely with the man of the household. But even though this is the case, he can abandon his family and leave. While the woman cannot abandon her family and leave because she sees that family as her responsibility. So no matter the stress or how hard it gets for her, she cannot leave, whereas the husband can leave. There are a couple of recommendations which we found from the research. So there were four main recommendations, which include the following. Uh, we need to address toxic masculinities and provide support to men who embody alternative masculinities as well. We also need to recognize the gendered impacts of localized beliefs and also contextual differences. That is, we have to know that even though Malawi is a small country, but there are different beliefs in different districts of the country. And also, program staff and trainers must engage with their own gendered assumptions, norms, stereotypes, and identities before they begin to bring such interventions to communities. And also, on the same point, so we as staff and also trainers of the gender transformative component went through a gender transformation training themselves so that we can address our own assumptions and norms. And also, finally, the other recommendation was that we need to bring men and women through a process of realization in order to reach their own conclusions about how gender inequality limits their experiences and also opportunities. So taking these recommendations into consideration, Concern realized that we cannot work in isolation. So we worked with different partners at both the national and international level. Some of our national partners were the government and other local non-government organizations. But for this gender transformative piece particularly, we worked with Sonke Gender Justice, which my colleague will talk about in later slides, and also Trinity College Dublin, that is the Trinity Impact Evaluation Unit. So what is this graduation program? This graduation program is locally known as Tuoloke. This name Tuoloke, it's a local name which was given by the program participants. If you translate this word literally, it just means crossing a bridge, maybe from one stage to another. So they did say that they want to cross from a point of poverty to a point of prosperity. That's why they called it Tuoloke. So for those that are not familiar with the program, it is a livelihoods program which uses the graduation approach. This was first piloted by BRAC in Bangladesh, and then Concern Malawi adopted the same approach and then tailored it to fit the Malawian context. This program is designed to promote self-reliance and also to build resilience, therefore reduce the need for external support in the long term. That is, we only work with these households for a few number of months and then we leave them and move on to the next group of households. This program also includes what we call the enabling environment. This focuses on the broader community. So the purpose of this enabling environment is just to make sure that when these households graduate from both the program and from extreme poverty, they graduate into an environment which will enable them to sustain the gains that they made. The program has 5 main components. The first component is comprehensive targeting, where this is where we select the households that will participate in the program. The second component is known as consumption support. So we did provide monthly cash transfers worth about 15,000 Malawi kwacha to each of the graduation households. And then the households also went through skills training and coaching, where different types of trainings were offered to the households, including business skills training, village savings and loans training, nutrition trainings, wash trainings, and also the gender transformative trainings. And we also improved savings and financial access. This was done by strengthening the village savings and loans groups. And finally, the last component is the asset transfer, but for Malawi, what we did was the capital transfer. So we gave them money and not actual assets, and the money that we gave them was 96,000 Malawi kwacha. The program is for 5 years. It started in 2017 and we will finish the program end of this year in 2021. We target extreme poor and also poor households who have labor capacity. But because of the gender transformative research which we conducted within the program, we worked with households who were married or were couples. So in terms of participants, we targeted 2,000 households with the graduation package, and then we targeted 6,000 households in the enabling environment with the broader community activities. So what makes this program unique? So this program has a gender component which is known as umodzi in our local language. This word umodzi means united. Umodzi is this gender transformative training that they went through. So the training has 12 modules, where one module is administered per month per group. So these households go through this training once in a month, and then when they're going through household visits, their case managers also follow up on what they went through during the umodzi, and each session takes approximately 2 to 3 hours. So this training engages couples to discuss issues such as gender norms, power, decision making, budgeting, violence, positive parenting, and also healthy relationships. This program also aims at transforming gender and also power relations among the couples that we target. So the picture you're seeing there is one of the umodzi training sessions with our program participants out in the field. In terms of theory of change, with umodzi, we aimed to increase cooperation. That is to ensure that the couples make more decisions together and also create a common vision of what they want for their family. Because as part of umodzi, they had to create a family vision as one of the activities, which was done by the couple and also other household members. We also wanted to improve budgeting and planning skills for the household. That is to increase efficient resource allocation, thereby increasing the productivity of the household, and also to strengthen behaviors around savings and investment change, and also improve the resources which are spent on children. With umodzi, we also wanted to improve the couple's communication skills and enable them to manage stress and anger in better ways. We also wanted to improve women's income generating options by changing attitudes around acceptable occupations and also mobility of the woman. What we intended to decrease through umodzi were the following. First, wanted to decrease conflict and violence, which is triggered by shifts in power due to the female spouse being the graduation program recipient. Because all these couples that went through umodzi, the main recipient or the primary recipient was the woman of the household. So we wanted to address any conflict and violence which was triggered by this shift in power. We also aimed to decrease the conflict between children and also parents through providing new ways to parent. Because in Malawi, we are strong believers in spare the rod, spoil the child. So we wanted to address on how they can parent without having to beat their children. So I will now hand over to Paul from Sonke Gender Justice so she can tell us more about what they do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thokozani, for handing over to me. My name is Mpoboshe Mabena Lunga from Sonke Gender Justice. I'm standing in on behalf of my colleague Nkonzo J. Kanyile, who is leading up this amazing work that I'll be speaking about that was conducted in Malawi. So I will begin briefly by sharing a background of who Sonke Gender Justice is. So Sonke Gender Justice was established in the year 2006 as a human rights-based organization. Sonke's main focus is to strengthen government, civil society, and citizen capacity to support men and boys to take action to promote gender equality, and also to prevent domestic and sexual violence, and also to reduce the spread and impact of HIV. So what do we believe in? We believe that women are equals.
We fully support gender equality and women's empowerment, and we believe that a more equal world benefits women, men, boys, and girls. We also believe that men must act. And in order to achieve equality for women, men need to be seen as part of the solution. And equality is only achievable if we work together as men and women, boys and girls. And also, we believe that working as allies with existing women's rights movements is also quite necessary. Now, there's another question on why do we need to engage men and boys? So, we need to engage men and boys because men have their own gendered vulnerabilities and our own specific health and their own specific health and social needs. And also, it's essential in fostering positive views and relationships and behaviors among men from an early age. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about the partnership that Concern and Sonke have together. So the partnership that Concern Worldwide has with Sonke Gender Justice, which was around strengthening Concern's capacity for gender transformative programming. So which really started by assessing the attitudes of Concern staff in Malawi. And as mentioned earlier, this work was made possible by the global partnership that Concern and Sonke has had over the years. So in this work, Sonke's role was to support the Concern's country programs to strengthen their capacity to do gender transformative work. And how would this be done, if you may ask? Well, the answer is that we had to start with Concern's very own staff, like what Togozani mentioned earlier on. So we created time, for example, in terms of taking the staff away from their usual workspace and be in a safe space to conduct our workshops with the staff. And we also invested time to equip the staff so that they could be able to interact with the community, so that they themselves could become role models to carry out these workshops by having some space to reflect on their own personal journeys. I will now take you through the process that we used for the gender norms transformative approaches that we used. So these approaches are programs and interventions that create opportunities for individuals to actively challenge gender norms. So we began by developing a curriculum that's called Breaking the Barriers. It has several sessions in the curriculum. We carried out workshops for country staff in Malawi, including those who were involved in the Umodzi project. So the staff managed to go on a personal journey. They managed to reflect on their own personal attitudes and how they've been exposed or affected by things like gender norms, things like stereotypes, power, decision making, shared responsibility, and something that I think cuts across many countries in Africa, which is violence. And also how to really begin the change process, because it's another thing for you to speak about these things and do nothing, but we really also wanted the staff to go through a process of change. So we thus supported the Malawi staff, who in turn would implement the graduation model. So if you can see the picture there on the screen, you will see that these are staff from Malawi who included the country director. They were being taken through a session which is also in the Breaking the Barriers curriculum, which is called Gender Fishbowl. So this activity ideally aims to create dialogue between men and women by letting them speak freely about various issues around gender. So what happens is a group of men, for example, will sit on the outer circle while the women will sit in the inner circle. Several questions will be then asked for the group that's inside. I'll take the women, for example. So the idea is that the men will have to listen and not really interfere with what the women are discussing about. So ideally, this session really aims to have men listen to what women go through on a daily basis. So this and also the session goes vice versa. So the women will then go into the outer circle and the men will come and sit in the inner circle, and the women would also need to sit in and listen to what men are really going through. So in short, this activity helped staff to speak out and listen to the different experiences of gender-related issues. So staff then was capacitated on how to improve their programming by reviewing their gender sensitivity in their programs, because like I mentioned earlier, this was a personal journey. So it became a bit easier for them to implement having a gendered lens into the programming. We also held several follow-up remote support sessions and visits. So these were structured schedules with the team that was involved with Umotsi. So in terms of progress and challenges, we did provide guidance on how to address these challenges by doing country visits. For example, we went to see the Umotsi sites where we met with some of the program participants, and that also helped us with providing further guidance and support after interacting with the participants. And then for me, if you ask why, I'll say maybe a question on why this approach was important. So the answer is that it was important because it enabled staff to challenge their own attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors before they could really impact the community or beneficiaries. This also ensured that staff are speaking at the same context in terms of gender norms, and that they also had a similar values around the subject matter. Next slide, please. So I'm then going to share a quote from one of the staff members, which I hope will clearly show how personal this journey was in him to go through this process that we did with Sonke. So I quote, "The Sonke training was eye-opening in so many ways. After the training, I noticed changes in how male and female staff interacted when we realized different assumptions that we have been making about our colleagues. Even in my own home as a husband and a father, I started conversations with my children and my wife about gender equality and negative norms. The training helped me in facilitating sessions with communities as I could speak about my own assumptions and the changes that occurred for me personally." And I close quote. So this is a quote from one of the gender program support officer at Concern in Malawi, which really shows how this process really impacted him. I mean, for him to even create these dialogues with his family and his children, for us it was something that was quite impactful. So thank you so much. I will now hand over to my colleague Tara to take us through the next process.
Good afternoon. My name is Tara Beatty, and I'm an economist and a research fellow in the Trinity Impact Evaluation Unit in Trinity College Dublin. So thank you very much for joining us today. So I guess I want to lay out that, pretty soon after Concern decided to implement a graduation program in Malawi, they partnered with us in time to understand what type of barriers do poor households face in moving out of poverty, particularly women. Now, I think given the extensive context that Toko laid out in Malawi, the research was designed to primarily learn whether the gender of the graduation program recipient matters for outcomes such as female empowerment, spousal cohesion, intimate partner violence, but ultimately welfare outcomes such as food security, income, and consumption. Now, again, given the elaborate theory of change Toko outlined that Umotsi was built on, the research was also designed to see what is the impact of adding on a couple's empowerment training, such as the Transforming Gender and Power Relations, on these outcomes I've just articulated. Now, on the next slide, we kind of take a step back, right? So why graduation? I think it's important to emphasize that to date, graduation represents one of the most promising interventions to tackle extreme poverty. And this really builds on quite an extensive research body that has shown the graduation enables beneficiaries to engage in micro-entrepreneurs activities. In a 6-country study done, they found that graduation led to an income increase of between 5 to 38%. And in Bangladesh, they found that this effect has persisted 7 years after the intervention. In addition to evidence of graduation affecting consumption, productive and household assets, they also found that graduation improved physical health and political involvement. Yet, in this extensive body of research, there are some unknowns. In particular, on gender. So the initial 6-country study found little evidence or impact on women's empowerment indices. And even when there was a change initially, this effect didn't persist over time. Yet more recent research from Bangladesh and Afghanistan have found significant impacts on women's empowerment. Other research has found that the graduation might have unintended effect, such as decreasing the mobility of women outside the house, but also possible takeover by men of income generating activities over time. And therefore, that's why the research was designed to look at the role of gender within graduation. Now, building on the context analysis that Toko laid out about the intra-household relations in Malawi, I think our baseline data that we've collected for the research also shows a case for why you want to understand the gendered effects of graduation. In particular, from our baseline data, our male respondents said 96 felt that men should decide priorities for spending money. Over 60% of our male respondents said that they themselves make the final household financial decisions. When we talk to the female spouses, 39% of women said they can rarely or never spend small amounts of money on their own. 68% of women said they can rarely or never purchase clothing for themselves or for their children with their own earned money without the permission of someone else. We found that 32% of female spouses experienced emotional, physical, or sexual violence from their partner, and 24% experienced physical and or sexual violence. So I think a real compelling case for why focus on gender within the graduation. Therefore, the research methodology was designed with 2 core components. The primary component is quantitative, and it assesses the impact of the graduation using randomized controlled trial methodology. In particular, starting in 2007, a census was conducted to identify eligible households, meaning they had to be ranked as poor or very poor, be married, live together at least 40% of the time, and be willing to engage in an income-generating activity. Based on this, 200 villages with at least 20 eligible households were identified. These villages were then randomly allocated to 4 arms. First, graduation targeting the female spouse. Second, graduation targeting the male spouse. Third, graduation targeting the female spouse, but where Umodzi, the Transforming Gender and Power Relations training, was incorporated. And finally, a control group. And the reason for the control group was that in this way, we have a valid counterfactual in which we can compare the impacts of each version of the graduation to a group that didn't get it. Now, finally, these villages were randomly allocated into 2 cohorts. Cohort 1, which started the graduation first, and cohort 2, which started it 1 year later. Now, this research is covering 5 years, and we'll only be collecting midline data this year, so we'll only be able to estimate welfare and empowerment impacts later this year. But as we've been collecting data over the last few years, we can say something first initially about the effect of graduation within Malawi. So in the last 2 years, our households, both control and treatment, have undergone 2 shocks. In 2019, Malawi was hit by Cyclone Idai, which caused quite extensive flooding. And what we found was that graduation households in our first research cohort were more food secure than all other households. In our data collection from last year, we found that being a graduation household was correlated to being more secure than all other households. Now, in regards to gender, as I said, we'll only be able to estimate gender impacts later this year. But as part of the household visits, Concern incorporated gender-sensitive messaging on COVID. And what we found from our data collection last year is that providing these gender sensitive messages affects beliefs. More specifically, 32% of households that received both the graduation but umodzi, the gender empowerment training, held more egalitarian beliefs regarding the division of labor between genders within the household. More specifically, in these households, they were more likely to say that husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, are both responsible for taking care of children, for collecting water to wash hands, for washing children's hands. Only 21% of households in the control arm held the same belief. And we found that the difference between these two groups was significant at the 1% level. In our next, what we also felt vital is, while we had this very strong quantitative component, we thought it was vital to incorporate a qualitative component. And so we incorporated a qualitative impact protocol. It's designed at Bath University by Professor Kopstake, and we're doing it in partnership with the Bath Social and Research Unit and the Center for Social Research at the Chancellor College, University of Malawi. In particular, the QUIP enables us to understand, could we go back one slide for a second? Sorry. To understand participants' own interpretation of the impact of the program on their own lives. So they are identifying changes in their lives, and they're self-identifying what are the drivers behind this change. And importantly, with this QUIP, it's program blind, meaning that the researchers who go and do the interviews don't actually know what program they're talking to participants about. But the questions are designed so that if there is an impact, that impact will come out. So on the next slide, we see that the QUIP was designed to be conducted over both districts that Concern is working in. So 48 individual qualitative interviews were done and 8 focus groups, and it was designed so that we could better understand the differences between the graduation targeted at the female spouse and the graduation targeted at the female spouse, but where the couple was undergoing the gender transformation training. So what we see is that regardless of which group was interviewed, an increasing portion of women are able to start businesses, invest in productive assets, and undertake farming. So we have a quote here that shows this. This money boosted my income, and I managed to buy goats, chickens, a bicycle, and iron sheets. I now live in a better house, and the livestock provide a steady source of income in times of shocks. As a woman, I own blankets and clothing, but have recently acquired livestock and iron sheets due to the cash transfer from Concern Worldwide. Now, what we do find, though, in the next slide, is that twice as many respondents who had undergone umodzi, the Transforming Gender and Power Relations training, were likely to note positive changes in household expenditure. These respondents acknowledged the empowerment effect of owning and spending money they earn themselves. Before Tuwaloke, we were buying food, but now we have bought iron sheets and livestock since we received some money from the project. Previously, it was my husband who was chiefly responsible for determining how to spend money, but now he involves me because of the training on gender that Tuwaloke provided us with. I've been able to buy things like livestock, which was not possible before. Tuwaloke came into the picture. I used to just buy food because with that money we were earning, that is all we could manage. In addition, by looking at the interviews comparing these two groups, in the next slide, we also find Can we move to the next slide, please? That the households that had gone through the couples training were more likely to report perceived changes in intra-household roles and responsibilities. These respondents said that domestic responsibilities were now shared, with men taking an increasing role in some domestic tasks, rather than this being the sole responsibility of women. And really, they self-identified the major driver for change was the umodzi training. We have a nice quote that captures this. Before Concern Worldwide trained us on gender, I would do all the household chores alone, and my husband would still shout at me for leaving out some tasks, even with fatigue at play. He was very insensitive, and he would just sit at home and watch me work. If there was no fence to fix, he would just fold his arms at home and not help me at all. Now we share chores, and he even helps me with the children, all thanks to the gender equality training from Concern Worldwide. I want us to take a step here, though, and step back, because these quotes are quite explicit, but we have to remember that how the qualitative research was designed was that it was blind. The interviewers didn't know what they were asking about. So these attributions to the gender training come from participants themselves. They're identifying the change, and they are self-identifying what has brought about this change. So in the next slide, I think we can capture this quite visually. And I think this, if we want to think about it, is participants' theory of change. So it complements the theory of change that Toko presented earlier, but from the participants' perspective. In particular, participants identified changes in their household, such as improved intra-household relationships, positive psychosocial well-being, the freeing up of time and labor, and increased collaboration. They said these changes were driven by fewer arguments in the household, more shared responsibility, and more emphasis on the importance of shared responsibility. The main driver behind this change then was the couples training. And this diagram is built through participants mentioning each of the training each time. And so the links, the relationship arrows become more thick, the more mentions are given. So one participant might mention it a few times. But I think this provides a really interesting visual of participants' theory of change and what drives and what are the mechanisms through which this change is achieved. Now, having presented these positive impacts, I think in the next slide, it's really important to acknowledge that we only saw some changes in decision-making on the use and sale of assets or property and on income earned. We did not find evidence yet of significant changes in deep-rooted patriarchal sociocultural norms whereby men are the main decision makers. In conclusion, I think this research is really relevant because it'll enable practitioners and policymakers to identify the effect of the graduation model on the lives of the poor, particularly women. It'll also help us identify whether the graduation model led to specific improvements in the lives of poor households and the mechanisms through which these changes were brought about. And finally, it'll be the first study to examine the gender dynamics of the graduation model. On that note, I want to thank you and turn the presentation back to my colleague, Toko.
Thank you very much, Tara. So before I go to the final slide, we'll just share a video of the program participants, and they'll describe how they found the gender transformative trainings. Thank you.
Ifwa yaje bungwe ya konseni idabwera bwera ndikulembera m'mamidzi muno taphunzira zinthu zoti tikabwera ku nyumba zinthu zimenezo zasintha moyo wathu tikusiyanisa kuti poyamba buja zachati kuphunzira maphunziro amodzi ayi ife akazi tidali kugwira zintchito mwa ife tokha amuna ade kuyimirira zintchito zezo layi koma pano taphunzira umodzi amuna kugwirambo ntchito imene tikugwira ifenso akazi tikugwiranso ntchito mothandizana ndi amunatu ntchito zolima kuthandizana zapakhomo abambo kusesambo abambo kuchapambo bambo kutithandizambo mabizinesi kapita ku bizinesi ukabwera upezambo chokudya mbali zatha kutsukidwa nyumba mwatha kusesedwa zovala achapambo umafikirambo kupumambo
sinaone kazi uvuta ifwa kuti naphunzira nkhani ya gender ndikupeza ndimati hayi imene ndi gender ndifati ndimagwira mosangala mupanda chivuto iliyonse ya kwa hiyo anaona ngati ni zachilendo koma kwa ine kupoza ndinaziphunzira nanenso ni malakalaka kwa maphunzisanso kuti zimakhalira ndi chonchi samakhalira zakalekale ya chifukwa kuti amuna amene akukana kugwira ntchito zachikazi amene wali mbokosi zolongola nazija zomenya nazija zinatha ndithu ngati imene ndinaphunzira timakhala ndithu wansangala Zawino.
Vanonse matha kwathandiza amayi mina kuti amayi wapita kudimba bambosi mina wapita akasaka ndrama moti fili mafika kuchuka mbale kuphika sima akabwera kumene kuchamba peza kuti sima apya kale mafika kudya nawo zapitiza kugwira ntchito mmenzi fole ntchito zimene zabwino kwambiri ndimona ngati ntchito za mabanja zimapepuka ndiponso matukulana mwachangu chimodzi sizasukanso mbali eya chimodzi
banja pathu anazalithandiza chifukwa kuti ino tikukwera kapena tikuchoka paja pamene tidali kageta panga zaitukuko ichi cha nyumba timakhala nyumba iyo iluko
phindu aida kuti mubanja kukhonda kugwirizana kudalipo munthu akachita pinthu natani najuwe ndi pakadali pano tikuchita chinthu chopanga anthu angasi awiri zanithandiza poyamba ndikapingika ndikabuka kumunda ndikabwera nditunge madzi ndichuke mbale ndiphate pa moto nditunge madzi akusamba iwo nditunge madzi akusamba makolo kena ndikwatipo ndisambisipo anthu ana kakha kuti kuli kuchapa nguwo ndikwalano nguwo nditani pontho ndipepo ndikabhizika manini ndipano kangati pabwera umodzi ndikuona ngati penshevi kusintha kupanika ndikupanika pontho tayi ndikungokhala ngati mini ndikukhalirampo mbale matsuki alimozi madzi amatha kundithandiza anaona kana bhizika mani mwanina amatha kutenga ndikuchapa mathwera kapena tayi kutenga mwana uja iyo machapa mathwera pakuna chitiwa pile pano kupitanimbo nakupichitambo pano chitukuko chikafuna chitimire pano chitukuko inaenda patsogolo nyumba nchina mangu akale asanzweto unga mbuzi tegula kale zilipo nkhuku tagula kale pano asanga kadikuinikirambo ng'ombe njinga moto monga gali moto tinekhumbira kuti tani nayo tikhale nayo ndi masomphenya patsogolo anafunefuno ngapi kuti kwaniritse masomphenya athu
mutiso pali china chimene chanithandizanso apanga nkhanza kwambiri kummenya nthawi ina kumwatira kumano kazi pano yayi ende ulipo ngati ana anga kuli chonchonso ndikuti ino sadzatengera zimene tinali kuchita pamba ja angati uziwala ndikukumbukira kuti mbanja kapena kuti ino anthu akwatirana amakhala chonchi.
So finally, we'll talk about the next steps, or maybe where we go from here, following all the presentations and also the video that we showed. While we've learned a lot about integrating Umodzi into the graduation approach, there's still some gaps which were identified, which include the following. First of all, community resources and also household interventions for gender empowerment. Specifically, what interventions work at the community level and are needed to promote change at the household level. And also, even though we're already working at the household level, but then what works better or best at the household level. Secondly, we also need to look at intensity and duration. That is, how long or how often do these interventions need to be done in order to bring about the change that we are looking for. And finally, we also need to look at scalability of such gender transformational programs within the graduation programs. So we have reached the end of the presentations. Thank you very much.
So thank you to all of our speakers for your wonderful presentations. I hope everybody found that as fascinating as we did. So now is the time to ask your questions, and we can start the chat and the discussion. I think Suzanne has been monitoring some of the questions or the chat during the presentation, but we wanted to start off just by asking the panel a bit more about some of the challenges that we have faced in implementing this and implementing the program, implementing the research, and potentially any advice that we would give to other organizations that might want to do something similar.
All right, I can start answering that question. First of all, I would say in terms of advice, because of the nature of this program, it was the first to be implemented in Malawi. We had the pilot phase, so I would say that piloting programs is very important for us. It helped us to learn, first of all, more about the context where we're going to work and also where the program will go. And also, secondly, during this pilot phase, this is when we developed training materials. So this formative research that we're talking about, it also helped us, and I'll also answer a question which was asked here about sharing of the formative research. So during this pilot phase is when we implemented this formative research, which just acted as a background to feed into the development of the training materials. Another thing maybe I would share about the graduation program or UMODI is that change is a slow process. You can't expect change to happen over time. And also, you need to support the program participants and also other members of staff as they're going through this change process. So there'll be a lot of unknowns, and that's okay. You just need to make sure that you are there for the program participants. And also, they do rely a lot on their case managers. So they may be unsure, even they may come with concerns that people in the community are laughing at me. So they do look at the case managers who do their household visits and also their trainers as their friends. So this relationship was also very important to make sure that the gains were there and also they were sustained by the community members. Some of the challenges that we met, one of which was absenteeism, especially towards the final models. You can see that this is a training which happens for a year. They're expected to attend one training in a month. So in order to combat this challenge that we made in terms of absenteeism, what we did was we followed up during household visits to ask why they didn't make it. And also during the next session, we had a makeup session, or we did a revision of the previous session for those that missed the previous session so that they can get a chance to hear about what others did. Yeah, so in brief, that's about it.
Thanks, Toko. Tara, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think, one of the difficulties is when you integrate a research component, that piloting stage becomes even more important because all those protocols then have to be implemented and adhered to through both research cohorts, which I think Concern, did really well. But it means that you have to really work quite closely as researchers and with the implementing, which I think was a good experience. So nothing else on that part.
Great. Okay, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions coming in. So we have a question from Carol Valentine. The data mainly shows change at household level. Have you looked at community level changes in gender roles and attitudes?
Maybe I'll start with that one, and then Toko, I can hand off to you. I mean, I think, Carol, one of the decisions we had to make with the research was first to understand change at the household level. So one of the next steps, as Toko laid out in her concluding, was what happened at the community. So we do collect village level data, but it doesn't go as extensively into the norms and attitudes on that. I think we have some initial feedback from our qualitative research, which said that initially, while couples, had kind of pushback from the community, over time, people got used to seeing the husband do particular activities, and also within each village, 12 households, were part of the graduation. So there was, I guess, at least a certain core number of households that were going through the training. But I think that's a good point, and it's an area for further study.
Yeah, and also maybe to add that the women who were part of this Umodzi did say that other women were coming to them to ask that, what did you do to your husband for him to be helping you? How come there's so much peace? So even though, like Tara mentioned, people were laughing at the household at first, but then over time people were like, okay, so this really is helping this household. And also along with the changes in Umodzi, people saw that the household was also doing well in terms of IGS, so they were becoming more and more economically empowered as well.
And just to clarify, it's 12 households per village. So we had 600 households who went through the Umodzi training.
Okay, and then if we just staying on that kind of theme of the community, we've got a couple of questions around, did we engage community leaders? And if so, was this important? And another similar question around, did we do any work outside of the couples, for example, with power holders and other influential people within the community, and try to build up peer support for changes in gender norms?
Toko, do you want to take that and I can add?
I think Toko might be frozen.
In regards to the gender training and I think graduation, I can start, concern linked with all community leaders, all the way down to the village level, informing them of the program, what they were going to do, the interventions, because you have to have community buy-in. But in regards to actual Umudzi, sorry, Toko, you're back. They were asking how you all engage in community leaders. So I was just saying that, you engage by informing them, telling them the background, and bringing them on board. I think Toko still might be frozen. So, but in terms of Umudzi, I mean, we had to make this decision, I guess, do you take it at the community level? But like I said earlier, we were trying to understand what happens at the household level and to disentangle that from the community. So I think the next stage of this research would be thinking of, what community initiatives help make these more sustainable or more, scalable. And I think that's where the next areas of questions are.
Yep, great. Thank you, Tara. We have another question around whether we made any adaptations for communities or families practicing polygamy.
From my understanding, there was no adaptations. Whoever the household was, they were the household that was invited. All the wives weren't invited. It was just the primary beneficiary. But through field visits, what we found was that this information was getting dispersed to other households. And when I talked to a few households, they said, we're practicing this in both households. So the actual training wasn't adapted; it was just delivered to the main recipient and her spouse. But from field visits, it seems implied that it is getting filtered out.
Yep, great. Suzanne, since Toko has dropped off for now, if you want to chip in at all, feel free. We also have another question around why is it called the graduation approach?
Tara, I think you should take that one.
I'm not 100% sure, but that was the term it was given, right? Graduating out of poverty. And it was given that term from the BRAC study and then from the 6 countries study. So it was a name given for, you going through this program with these 5 components, and through that you're meant to graduate out of poverty.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. Okay, now this is a very, very good question here. How did you convince men to enroll in such a program, taking into account the embedded masculinities behavior? We often get asked this question.
Suzanne, shall I kick off?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was just provided as, this is the graduation, and this Umudzi component was just a core part of the component that a household had to engage in. So it wasn't, so if they agreed to participate in the graduation, then they agreed to participate in all components, is kind of how it was pitched. Suzanne, was there anything additional, Dan, I think?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of sensitization, you see from the video and you see from some of the comments around the women and the wives that we work with and the men thinking they're strange. And so it did involve at the setup sort of a bit of convincing in terms of being part of the program. And, I think that's something that, we saw over the 12 months kind of series. So it's monthly sessions, and like, Poe talked about with Sanke, the training for our staff was so crucial, because the training for our facilitators to then talk to the communities and sort of, there is an element of convincing And we saw change over the first few sessions where, this is strange and people, would think the men are kind of odd doing chores and, but we saw that change over time. And you see from the videos that, there is that kind of, even though in the community it may not be seen as something that, is a norm, we really saw that change. So yeah, I think in terms of convincing to sign up, it was part of the program, but when change starts occurring in the household, we saw that kind of attendance rate continue, and then you can see that change. So and really down to kind of Sonke's gender transformative training as part of the concern team here, you can really see that shift in the team from that support and from that training, from how the staff interact with each other, the conversations that we have about gender, and their ability then to go into the community and actually really work and facilitate kind of difficult conversations.
And I would just add to that when we do this kind of work in multiple contexts, I think that first session is really key, because sometimes they will come along thinking, oh, I've heard in other countries this is just going to be about giving women all the power. And then we got there, we went to the first session and we realized it was just about working as a family, working as a team, being a good father. And then that's kind of okay with them. And then it's like an encouragement for them to continue. So I think that first session is probably really key to whether they voluntarily come back or not. And then we also had follow-up visits in this program. So if people had missed a session, because it would be a long time between one session and the next if you miss one in between, because it's only every month, we were doing kind of recap sessions for those that had missed, so that they would still get those kind of key messages and key reflections in between.
I think also the final thing is maybe to build on Toko's point about the piloting. We like the Emodzi component was also piloted. So I think a lot was learned there about what worked and what didn't, and what helps men and their spouses continue through the program.
Okay, so then we have a question about, according to us, how long does such a program take to achieve sustainable change?
I mean, hopefully through the research, that is something that we'll come back to. I mean, in terms of the graduation, I think there's a huge body of research already out there that shows that the effect is sustainable and in some cases even increases over time. But in regards to the gender norms component and gender relations, so we're collecting midline data, which is this year, so about 6 months after households finish participating, and then we'll go back and collect data a year later. So we should at least be able to see a year and a half post the program ending, are these changes on intra-household relationships, or do they still exist? Do the effects persist? So it's a question to be answered.
Yeah, and I suppose we could also add that we had one person who told us when we were talking to program participants in the community, who said that he'd already completed the 12 months, he'd been to every session, but he kind of felt that he needed something else to make sure he didn't slip back into his old habits, like a refresher or something that would kind of re-encourage, keep that motivation going. And so we adapted the program once we kind of had that feedback to include a sort of a refresher session 6 months after the 12 months the 12 months with Emodzi sessions had finished. So we'll do that with each cohort, in case that's an issue, across the board.
Adele, I think Ruth has her hand up, one of our participants. So okay. I think it's been up for a while, so maybe we can unmute her and have a different voice. Thanks.
Okay, Ruth, I think you should be able to go ahead.
All right. I have typed the question already in the chat box, but then I wanted to say well done. I really enjoyed your presentations. and I've learned so much. And I just wanted to find out if this graduation model is open to the public, and if the research is as well, and how can one access such? Thank you.
Well, we can just start with on Concern's website, we have an insights page, which is where we have all the kind of research publications and things like that. So you'll be able to find what we currently have, which has descriptions of the model and that kind of thing to date. And then once we have results to share sometime later this year, that's where you'll find them. So we will be kind of publishing them in different ways, but you know, that's where you can find everything that we have so far.
Yeah, and also to add, Adele, we have different learning briefs in different topics in almost all the components that I talked about. So those would be interesting for you as well, and you'll be able to find them. So yes, they are available.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have another question about, were adolescent children in the households included in any of the training?
Adele, I think this also links to a question further down about people, you know, where people with disabilities included. I mean, I guess on the criteria, like Toko, I think you can clarify like the criteria of households that were included because of the research, which was a confining component in that way. You know, all eligible households had to be categorized as poor, very poor, be married, live together 40% of the time at least, and be willing to do an income generating activity. So, you know, I think that defined who was eligible, and you know, people with disabilities, if they fit those eligibility criteria, were included. But adolescent children, I don't think were included. Toko?
Yeah, you're right, Tara. So we didn't primarily target them, but then we did still reach them if they were household members, because I should clarify that the graduation program targets the household and not just maybe the primary participant on their own, but because we're targeting the whole household, when we're doing household visits, they're part of that. And whatever gains are there, they almost always are for the whole household. So we did reach them, but they were not, we didn't exactly say that we're only looking for adolescent girls or boys to be part of the program. But as part of households, yes, we did reach them.
Okay, great. Then we have a question about, what are the things you wish you would have done differently? What did not work and had to be removed from the project, if anything?
Maybe I can start. In the first phase, or maybe the pilot phase of the program, we did work with what we called proxies. For example, if the household didn't have labor capacity, or if they were very old, so we worked with proxies who maybe were trained, and we trusted these proxies to go train the other households. But then later we discovered that there were a lot of challenges. For example, if the proxy gets the money instead of the primary participants, then we were getting a lot of complaints, or weren't too sure exactly if the benefits were at what level they were getting to the household. So for the when we started full implementation, we did not train proxies. We were training the primary participants. That's one of them. And the other challenges that we met in terms of maybe the content of the trainings or the curriculum, through the pilot phase, like we talked about, if something was not clear, we were able to address it and maybe revisit the training materials that we have. So some of the challenges that we made during the pilot phase, we're able to rectify them when we started full implementation. That's why the pilot phase of a program is always very important.
Okay, great. Thank you, Toko. All right, so now could you tell us a bit more about the graduation content in terms of training methods, etc.?
Okay, I can get that one as well. So in terms of the graduation program, I did talk about it has 5 components. The first component is the comprehensive targeting. So for this one, we used the community-based worth ranking and we did a census. So the reason for this comprehensive targeting was to make sure that we had the right program participants, that we reached the extreme poor and poor households. And during this, we had a complaints and response mechanism, which goes throughout the program and also in all programs that we implement as concern. So if, for example, there were complaints about the program participants that we chose, people were able to lodge these complaints and were able to choose the right program participants through this. So it was a long process, but finally, when we did choose the program participant, then we started what we called the coaching and mentoring. So this was the household visits, which were done by the case managers. So these were both from Concern, they were employed by Concern, and also some were members of staff from our local partner called CARD, who did the other component of the program. So during these household visits, there are different topics. So we have a caseworker manual where we make sure that all the topics that are discussed are in the manual that are documented, and also to make sure that they have all the content with them. So there are different trainings which are done or different discussions during these household visits, including WASH, nutrition, we talk about gender, we talk about climate smart agriculture, and then we also give the household a chance to talk about what issues they're meeting. So these household visits make sure that there is a close relationship between the program participant and the caseworkers. So this developed trust and also ensured that they were able to understand exactly what it is they're supposed to do in order to graduate. And then the households went through different trainings. One of the trainings that we've talked about in detail in this presentation was the Umodzi training. And another training which they went through was the business skills training. So the business skills training is a 17-rule business training. This is where they learn on how to implement an IGA or a business. So sometimes you call it an idea, sometimes you call it a business, but it's all the same. So after they go through this 17-rule business skills training, so this 17-point business skills training is done for about 4 months, sometimes 5 months, because they get one rule in a week, and then they're given a chance to go and practice. And then when they're getting the next rule, they give us feedback on the previous rules. So this helps them to choose the right business. First of all, they look at what works, what doesn't, look at what other people are doing. And then afterwards, they get their capital transfer. So we gave them 96,000 kwaja, which is around 110 euros, to start either a new business or maybe to boost an already existing business. So we supported them throughout all these processes. So coaching and mentoring was happening every time. So the household visits happen twice a month. That is, they get one visit in 2 weeks. So as they're going through the different trainings, they're also getting support from their case managers. And they also get technical skills training. For example, if they choose a business in which they're not very familiar with, then they are trained technically on how to implement that business. So yeah, in not so short form, that's basically about the graduation program.
Great, thanks Toko, the graduation guru. So somebody said gender transforming is what we need to move forward the gender equality agenda more than gender sensitive. Yeah, we totally agree. And I think for us as Concern, that's where this partnership with Sonke has been so instrumental, because it's really given us a chance to propel forward how important we really think it is. And it's been a way to kind of really get the momentum going across many of our countries through these workshops and through this kind of reflection on the programs that we already have and how gender transformative or gender sensitive or gender blind they are, and what we could do to make them further along the continuum towards gender transformative. And I think that's really started to kind of filter down quite deeply in our organization, having this kind of expertise, being able to partner with someone like Sonke who can bring that expertise and sort of push us along this route. So that's really been a key part of this partnership too, and that's why we tried to exemplify that with the 3 circles to show that, you know, we really needed all 3 parts to be able to make this happen. So I just wanted to throw another question out there about which I've heard in lots of webinars on this kind of topic, about the engaging men approach and how you make sure that you know, you don't just increase men's power. So Toko or Tara, do you want to talk a bit about how our approach is maybe a bit different to just the kind of just engaging men and boys?
I mean, I can start on this, but I guess, you know, in our original version, like, if we go back to Toko's theory of change that laid out what Umodzi was designed about, I think pretty soon and early on we realized that we had to have the couples together for a lot of it in terms of family vision, budgeting, but also certain sessions, you know, when men discuss something, women had to also have a safe space to discuss a component of it or things that were relevant to them. So I think, you know, other than just engaging men and boys, Emodzi was about engaging the couples. And, you know, every time they separated to discuss a particular topic, they were brought back to touch back on it to a certain level. And that included, you know, homework that they did that was followed up in the next session. So I think that's where it departed, you know, like of the 12 sessions, Toko, were at least 6 or 7 done as couples?
It should be more than that because they had 3 separate sessions. So 9 sessions were done as couples.
Okay.
Okay, great, thanks. Oh, can I just throw one question out there and then I'll come back to you, Suzanne? We would really love to hear from others about how you have addressed the community, the wider community, to change gender norms and attitudes and behaviours, because we, you know, as we said in the presentation, we do realise that this approach is very much focused at the household level, and there were potentially some gaps at the community level, and we are working to address that, but we'd love to hear from others about how you might be doing that. So feel free to type into the chat any experiences you have. Suzanne, did you want to say something?
No, actually, sorry, Adele, I was sort of like this, but there was an fake raised hand.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay. Yeah. So, are there any other questions or comments that anybody would like to make? If there are any hands up, let me know because I can't see them. Well, you can also contact us on the CSW platform. You can contact us individually. So if you wanted to share anything that you think of in terms of maybe some approaches you've heard of or have implemented yourselves at community level, then we would be really interested for you to contact us and have a chat with you about that. I guess if there's no other burning questions at the moment, we can just kind of start to wrap up. I mean, overall, we wanted this session to really kind of show why gender transformative programming and this approach is so important to us, not just for achieving equality outcomes, which is obviously like a main reason in itself, but also to be promoting, to be really achieving the outcomes that we're trying to achieve in all of the sectors that we work in. So in this case, graduation, livelihoods, food security, and those kind of outcomes. You know, we have recognised that it's really key for all outcomes that we're working towards, and now we've got this research which is actually trying to, you know, close that evidence gap to show us exactly how much. So for us, it's really, really exciting program to be working on. So yeah, like I said, if you want some more information about the research itself, have a look on Concern's website under the Insights page. And we hope that we've addressed most of your questions. We've got another question here actually. Have you noticed any community backlash? Toko, do you want to touch on that?
To answer the question, maybe I can say that at first there was a lot of animosity which was coming from the community, because they were like, why have you chosen this household and not mine to be receiving the money and also to be going through this program? So the way we addressed the community animosity was that we went back to the community, so we involved the local leaders, and we were able to explain to them in detail what the graduation program is all about, why we chose the households that we did. And also we did also emphasize on the complaints and response mechanism, that if they have any further question or any feedback from us on how we chose the households, then they can tell us. And so through this engagement with the community, by explaining to them, then they were able to understand that, okay, so this household is really poor or poorer than I am. That's why they're part of this program. And also one thing that did help us a lot to defeat community animosity was through the enabling environment activities. Because with the different trainings, the climate smart agriculture trainings, the nutrition trainings, which were open to all community members, the other community members did feel that they were still part of the program, even though they were not part of the graduation package households. So even these other trainings did help us to make sure that the community did participate, and also did support the graduation households as they went through the graduation program.
Great, thank you. So we're going to give the last word to two more of our program participants. We have another video which is just 1.5 minutes long. So I'm just going to share that now, and we will end with that. Okay.
Maphunziro umodzi amakhala kuti mwamuna ndi mkazi azipanga ntchito imodzi. Maphunziro umodzi amatipangisa kuti ifenso mabanja mwathu mutikhale mabanja opambana chifukwa chochokera maphunziro umodzi.
Business agenda yo china chilichonse ndikuendera limodzi. Business madam yanipindulira ngati mmene afotokozera kuti pano tamanga boys quarter komanso taumba njerwa 20 door, tagula malata ali nyumbamu, china chilichonse takwanirisa ziweto, mbuzi ndinazo 15, mabaka sindiwerenga nkhuku zosanena. Ndili mumodzi na budget yapasweni mumodzi. Kumbala majedo ndikutika ana ku school zovala nakaside kuzikhalira kwene pabanja panopo chakudya mbo ndikuti mamawa masana madzulo china chonse chikutani chikuyenda ndikuona ngati moyo wanga uli pabwino.
Monga ngati kuchapa uko mbuyo musini mapanga zochapa koma panopa ni machapa kaya kuwaza nkhuni kumene kale kuchapa mbale ni machapani mbuyo zimene sini mapanga kunauli foni mwana kuti ya ntchito zimene zazimayi zimene siningapange ni monga mamuna
nkhabe ngamade kukomerwa bwenji poli ndiona ngati nyengo zanga zidasintha. Anangu ade kuseka ati busambo ngopepera dai mpaka na ntchito za chikazi. Anangu ade kusirirambo kuti mamuna ngamba ngafika pepa lembo ndi kuti zinandiyendera. Ndide kuwaphunyisa kuti mukaona ngati mphe kupupa musolo mwanu ine pikunikomera pakhomo panga pachinja ndipo akujiwa kuti pachinjaji.
Sinimabwera pambo chifukwa ndimadziwa chimene ndikuchita ndimene ndikuchitira sinimabwera mbo ndimapita patsogolo kuti wina akaona mwina atengereponso naye.
Okay, so thank you so much everyone for staying with us till the end, and we wish you a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.